You want freedom, but do you realize freedom is not born in comfort? It is born in the firm. You long for peace, but is your peace anything more than avoidance? An anxious silence where truth is never spoken? Ask yourself, how many times have you bitten your tongue, swallowed your anger, or smiled when you wanted to protest? How much of your life has been spent avoiding conflict, and at what cost? Nietzsche's words strike at the root. Chaos, tension, struggle. But when you fear conflict, you trade your sovereignty for submission. You let others decide the terms of your life. You silence yourself in order to be acceptable, and every time you do, a part of your soul retreats deeper into exile. What is the result of such fear? Outward harmony, inward resentment. You call it kindness, diplomacy, maturity, but is it not cowardice disguised? And is not cowardice the surest chain? So the question is unavoidable. Are you willing to embrace conflict as a teacher, or will you keep hiding behind false peace? Freedom demands courage, and courage demands confrontation. To fear conflict is to fear yourself. Everywhere you are told to avoid friction, to be agreeable, to smooth over the rough edges. Schools teach you compliance. Workplaces reward silence. Families whisper that peace at any cost is virtue. But what kind of peace is built on denial? Is it not a fragile mask that hides a deeper war within? Modern culture confuses comfort with freedom. Yet beneath this surface calm, how many unspoken conflicts fester? How many resentments grow like roots in the dark, only to erupt later in bitterness, passive aggression, or collapse? Ask yourself, when was the last time you sacrificed truth in order to be liked, and did you not feel smaller afterward? Nietzsche's challenge exposes to refuse conflict is to refuse growth. And what happens to a life that always avoids growth? It becomes stagnant, brittle, hollow. Is this not why so many feel restless, even when their lives look peaceful? The tragedy is that fear of conflict masquerades as morality. You tell yourself you are being kind, patient, or selfless. In reality, you are hiding, choosing conformity over authenticity, silence. So, here is the context. If you want freedom, you must stop fearing conflict. You must learn to see it not as chaos that destroys, but as tension that creates. The real question is not whether conflict will appear in your life. It already has. The question is whether you will face it with courage or bury it until it poisons you. Which path do you walk now? Freedom is never born in avoidance. The tension you refuse in the outer world does not vanish, it migrates inward. The polite silence you offer others becomes a civil war within. To understand why this happens, you must examine the psychic structures Jung revealed: shadow, persona, and self. Each plays a role in why conflict terrifies you, and each shows why embracing it is the path to liberation. The shadow is the first foundation. It contains the instincts, emotions. You deny them to appear acceptable, but they do not disappear. They fester. When you refuse conflict, you also refuse your shadow. But repression guarantees rebellion. It erupts sideways as sarcasm, Ask yourself how many of your conflicts are not with others at all, but with the shadow you refuse to integrate. How much of your fear of confrontation is fear of meeting your own intensity? Until you admit that the shadow belongs to you, every attempt to avoid outer conflict only multiplies inner war. The persona is the second foundation. This is the mask you wear. When you identify with the persona completely, you sacrifice authenticity for peace. Outwardly, you seem calm. Inwardly, you smolder. Fear of conflict is often nothing more than fear of tearing off this mask. You fear others will see you as selfish, difficult, or unreasonable. But ask, is the persona protecting you or enslaving you? How many times have you betrayed yourself in order to protect a mask? The cost of the self is the third foundation, the totality of your being, both conscious and unconscious. The self demands wholeness, not fragments. It calls you to individuation, the process of uniting opposites, integrating shadow and persona, reconciling inner contradictions. But individuation is impossible without conflict. The clash of opposites is the furnace in which the self is forged. Each time you silence yourself, you halt the process. Freedom, then, is not freedom from conflict, but freedom through conflict. Do you see how your fear of struggle is also fear of your own becoming? Jung also warned about projection, another key mechanism. What you repress in yourself, you see in others. If you deny your aggression, you label others as bullies. If you repress ambition, projection ensures that conflict avoided inwardly becomes conflict projected outwardly. But here is the irony. The more you fear confrontation, the more conflict fills your life just in disguised forms. You argue with others, but you are truly wrestling with yourself. How many of your difficult people are simply mirrors of what you refuse to face in your own soul? Finally, there is individuation. Wholeness requires tension, struggle, confrontation of opposites. To fear conflict is to halt individuation. To embrace it is to step into freedom. Freedom is not the absence of struggle, but the mastery of it. Without conflict, you remain fragmented, a persona smiling above, a shadow boiling below. With conflict faced, the split begins to heal. And when you are whole, outer conflict loses its terror because... So what does this mean for you? It means that every time you avoid confrontation, you strengthen the shadow, deepen dependence on the persona, and delay individuation. You call it keeping the peace, but in truth, you are fueling inner chaos. Each avoidance is a choice against freedom. Ask yourself, how many years have you given to masks, to false harmony, to silent resentment? How long will you live as a stranger to your own shadow? And more urgently, are you willing to face conflict now, not as an enemy, but as the teacher that leads to freedom? Jung and Nietzsche converge here. Chaos, conflict, and tension are not acts. Think of the agreeable worker who never challenges authority. Every meeting, he nods, smiles, complies. Outwardly, he is the model employee. Inwardly, resentment builds like a hidden fire. He tells himself he is keeping harmony, but he returns home drained, bitter, whispering complaints to his spouse, or numbing himself with distractions. He avoids conflict with his boss. Is this not a slow form of slavery, appearing peaceful while carrying war inside? Or picture the partner who avoids arguments at all costs. She says, "It's not worth it," whenever a disagreement surfaces. She swallows irritation, hides disappointment, dismisses her own needs. At first, the relationship looks calm, but over time, her silence corrodes intimacy. Unspoken tensions grow heavy. Affection becomes duty. She avoided conflict to preserve connection, but in truth, she destroyed the very bond she sought to protect. Do you see how false peace can become the seed of collapse? Then consider the friend who says yes to every request. He lends money, gives time, offers help even when exhausted. He fears rejection, so he plays the role of endless giver. But beneath his generosity lies growing anger. His kindness becomes poison, dripping with quiet hostility. He cannot admit it because that would mean conflict. And so he suffers in silence, living as a mask of virtue while drowning in bitterness. How often do you do the same, saying yes when you mean no, only to despise yourself later? These are not rare cases. They are the ordinary lives of countless people who confuse avoidance with virtue. Each one Jung would call this repression. Nietzsche would call it cowardice. And both would warn what you repress will return. The worker's silence erupts one day in explosive rage or quiet resignation. The partner's unspoken needs resurface as betrayal or estrangement. The friend's hidden resentment leaks out as contempt or withdrawal. The avoidance of conflict guarantees a greater conflict later, usually one you cannot control. Notice also, the worker says, "I'm being professional." The partner says, "I'm keeping the peace." The friend says, "I'm being kind." Each phrase masks fear. Each excuse hides the refusal to confront. And every excuse strengthens the chains. Ask yourself, what noble-sounding words do you use to justify your own avoidance? How often do you call it patience when it is fear, or kindness when it is cowardice? What if the worker confronted his boss with respect but firmness? He would risk discomfort, but he would reclaim dignity. What if the partner voiced her needs directly, even at the cost of an argument? The relationship might erupt, but it might also deepen, rebuilt on truth rather than silence. What if the friend said no, setting boundaries with honesty? He would risk displeasing others. Do you see how a single act of confrontation could begin to dissolve years of silent suffering? These examples are mirrors. Perhaps you are the worker who complies, the partner who swallows anger, the friend who says yes until it hurts. Perhaps you have built a life of outward harmony and inward fracture. But the fracture is already. The more you avoid conflict, the more you waste your strength holding together a mask that is cracking anyway. Nietzsche reminds you, you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Conflict is not your enemy. It is the chaos that births authenticity. Jung adds, what you repress rules you. Every conflict you avoid becomes another chain. Together, they warn. So the question confronts you with urgency. Will you keep avoiding until your life collapses under silent resentments? Or will you face conflict and finally begin to live free? If you are to understand why fear of conflict enslaves you, you must expose the inner mechanics that drive it. Jung's framework and Nietzsche's challenge converge here. What you deny becomes your master, and what you refuse to fight becomes your fate. The first mechanism is avoidance as repression. When you dodge confrontation, you are not choosing peace, you are burying energy that demands expression. Anger, disappointment, desire, ambition, all forced underground. But repression never erases. This weight seeps back into your life as fatigue, anxiety, or quiet despair. Ask yourself, how often do you feel exhausted, not from what you do, but from what you refuse to say? How much of your suffering is the price of silenced truths? The second mechanism is the tyranny of the persona. You wear the mask of harmony, the agreeable colleague. Each time you smile instead of confront the persona grows stronger while the self weakens. You believe you are preserving relationships, but in truth, you are enslaving yourself to appearances. Is this not the very opposite of freedom, performing a role to be accepted while your true voice suffocates? The third mechanism is shadow eruptions. Jung warned, what you repress returns. Sometimes as passive aggression, a cutting remark, a cold silence. Sometimes as explosive rage, the years of silence breaking in a storm. Sometimes as betrayal, seeking escape from chains you never dared to question. Do you see how every avoided argument is not avoided at all, but simply delayed with higher interest? The fourth mechanism is projection. What you cannot accept in yourself. If you deny ambition, you resent the ambitious. Projection multiplies conflict by relocating it outside. You avoid confronting yourself, so you live in constant confrontation with the world. How many of your difficult people are mirrors of your own unacknowledged shadow? The fifth mechanism is decay of trust. When you avoid conflict in relationships, you believe you are preserving them. In reality, every unspoken grievance accumulates. Every swallowed resentment corrodes intimacy. Your silence is noticed, if not in words, then in tone, in distance, in coldness. Over time, the bond erodes. Ironically, the very act meant to protect peace ensures its destruction. Ask yourself how many relationships in your life have withered not because of conflict faced, but because of conflict. Avoidance disguises itself as patience, kindness, diplomacy. You tell yourself you are being mature, but often you are simply afraid. This illusion comforts you while you waste your life. Nietzsche would name it cowardice. Jung would name it repression. Both point to the same truth. Avoidance is, which do you value more, appearing good or living true? Together, these mechanisms form a cycle. Repression breeds persona. Persona deepens shadow. Shadow erupts in projection. Relationships decay, and avoidance cloaks itself as virtue. The cycle repeats until you awaken or until collapse. You can choose expression over repression, authenticity over persona, integration over shadow eruptions, ownership over projection, honesty over false peace. Each act of confrontation weakens the cycle. Each word of truth restores freedom. So the question presses you, how much longer will you let avoidance dictate your fate? Will you keep rehearsing? The true enemy is the machinery of avoidance that steals your strength, enslaves your spirit, and calls it peace. Nietzsche's warning is clear. Only in conflict is freedom forged. And Jung adds, the law, what you refuse to face, will rule you until you face it. The choice is before you. Will you keep hiding, or will you begin dismantling the mechanisms of fear today? If you want, Nietzsche warned that greatness demands struggle, and Jung showed that wholeness demands integration. Freedom will not come from theory, it will come from disciplined practice. You do not need to begin with heroic battles, you need daily steps that weaken avoidance and strengthen truth. Ask yourself, what would shift if you devoted yourself every single day to facing conflict? Begin by asking, where in my life am I silencing myself? Where am I smiling outwardly while seething inwardly? Write down the situations, the people, the moments where you retreat from confrontation. Do not judge yourself, simply name them. The act of naming already weakens the shadow. You cannot confront what you refuse to see. How many conflicts have you denied so long that you have? Do not wait for the perfect moment or the grand showdown. Begin with small steps. Say no when you mean no. Express preference when asked. Admit irritation when it arises. Each act is a rehearsal of freedom. At first it will feel dangerous, but danger is the point. Conflict is the crucible where sovereignty is forged. What dignity have you lost by trading authenticity for safety? The third practice is in silence, acknowledge the impulses you fear, your anger, your ambition, your desire to assert. Do not repress them, let them speak. Ask, what do you want from me? Why do you keep rising when I push you down? Jung taught that the shadow, once integrated, becomes strength. Your aggression, do you realize that the very forces you fear in conflict are the forces that would make you whole? The fourth practice is direct engagement. Choose one real conflict you have avoided at work, in family, in friendship. Approach it consciously, not to dominate, but to reveal truth. Speak clearly without apology for your existence. Listen as well, but do not retreat into silence. You may feel fear, but fear is not a signal to stop. It is. Ask yourself, what is worse, the discomfort of one honest confrontation or the slow death of endless avoidance? The fifth practice is reframing conflict as initiation. Each time you feel tension, remind yourself this is not chaos to flee, but energy to integrate. Conflict is the collision of truths, and out of that collision, something new is born. Without it, you remain stagnant. With it, you grow. How many opportunities for growth have you lost because you mistook initiation for threat? The sixth practice is relationship repair through truth. Choose one relationship where silence has corroded trust. Break the silence. Speak what has long been unspoken. At first, the relationship may tremble. It may even collapse. But if it collapses, was it not already hollow? And if it survives, it will be. What bond in your life is waiting to be purified by conflict rather than poisoned by avoidance? The seventh practice is daily discipline. Freedom is not won in a single confrontation. It is forged in rhythm. Dedicate a portion of each day, whether 20 minutes of reflection, one honest word spoken, or one avoided conflict faced. Fidelity matters more than intensity. Each day you keep the pact, fear loses ground. Each day you betray it, will you treat this practice as sacred, or will you betray yourself again by postponing truth? Together, these practices, reflection, small truths, shadow work, direct engagement, reframing relationship repair, daily discipline, create a path out of avoidance. They are not abstract ideals, they are weapons against the mechanisms that enslave you. Conflict will not vanish, so the challenge is clear. Will you continue rehearsing harmony while your soul fractures in silence? Or will you practice daily confrontation until truth becomes your native language? Freedom belongs not to those who avoid, but to those who face. Nietzsche's chaos and Jung's shadow are not enemies. They are the teachers waiting for you to listen. The only question, you know this already. The more you avoid, the heavier the weight becomes. Outward calm, inward fracture. You call it kindness, but you feel resentment. You call it patience, but you feel decay. How many more years will you trade in this false currency of peace? Nietzsche warned that creation requires chaos. Jung added that what you repress will rule you. Together they declare, the fear of each time you swallow your words, each time you smile while your heart seethes, each time you sacrifice truth to appear good, you betray yourself. And betrayal of the self is the deepest slavery. Is this not the very suffering you have been calling peace? Yet the path forward is already before you. You do not need to abolish conflict. You need to embrace it as the crucible of freedom. You do not need to resolve every war at once. You need daily fidelity to truth. Ask yourself what would change if today you spoke one honest word instead of silence, if you drew one boundary instead of retreat, if you faced one shadow instead of projecting it. Conflict will never leave your life, but fear of it can. Once you see conflict as initiation, not chaos, you begin to. So the call is clear. Will you continue performing harmony while your soul fractures? Or will you take up the discipline of truth and step into freedom? Begin today. Face one conflict within with another with life itself. Freedom belongs only